Hello and welcome. You're watching the Newshour Agenda Special Edition. I'm Padmaja Joshi. As India marches into 74th year of being a republic, the focus is on cherishing, highlighting and preserving our rich history and our cultural heritage. And as one of the moves to achieve that goal, a panel constituted by the centre has suggested that the list of monuments of national importance in India should now be revamped. Emphasising on the urgent need for rationalization, the panel pointed out that the existing list hadn't been reviewed since independence, and 2/3 of the monuments taken en masse from colonial-era list include 75 graves of British soldiers and officers, and several belonging even to the Dutch and the French. This basically means that a significant chunk of money allocated for preservation of these monuments goes into maintenance of colonizers' cemeteries. Now, while the BJP has hailed the recommendations as yet another move towards purging India of remnants of colonial mindset, there is also opposition to the move, to the report itself, and quite predictably, it's been branded an effort to try and rewrite history.
No, I don't agree. I don't agree whether one is a British graveyard or Muslim graveyard. If it is, it has been in the list of this, then this government has no right to change it.
Was chhed is for them, Mughals and British period era is the history. For us, our Sanatani history is the history. We have history which is much behind or much bigger than the Congress era history or the British history, because Congress was formed by the Britishers. That's why they can't still do away with the loyalty toward the Britishers.
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 1 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
Okay, joining us now is Sanjeev Sanyal himself. Sir, right at the outset, can you please take us briefly through the process of how this list of centrally protected monuments was reviewed and revised? What was the criteria?
So that you know that we have about 3,695 odd nationally protected monuments. These are monuments that have been accumulated essentially historically. So there were a whole bunch of monuments that are there at independence, which we inherited from the colonial era. Then some of the princely state monuments were included, and then some more were added along the way. Now, the problem of this is that they have never been properly reviewed, and this report that we are discussing basically makes a case for doing this. Why do we need this? At par with, say, the Taj Mahal or Red Fort or some famous temple. Similarly, there are several monuments that have gone missing decades ago, nothing to do with now. These are monuments that may have existed, may have importance, but for decades they have gone missing. The ASI cannot even find where they are. Now, at the very least, we should either look for them, since we can't find them, at least denotify them. There's no point in having this large list where the ASI simply does not have a chance of looking after them, and much of it is a meaningless list.
Now, according to the Economic Advisory Council's report, around a quarter of this current 3,695 monuments do not have national importance. What exactly sets them apart? How do you decide what is of national importance and what isn't?
That's precisely it. I mean, so we need a set of criteria to do it. Right now, the way it is done is fairly arbitrary. It's the local circle officer who sort of notifies it, and then it goes through a process. But it's purely procedurally. There is nothing in the AMASR Act or anywhere else to decide what a nationally protected monument should be. So one of the things the report is arguing for, that look, the UNESCO and other bodies do have some, other countries have some criteria. Let us adopt them. At the very least, what will happen is these colonial era graves will stop being in the list. You also have, for example, another strange thing. Large number of coast minars are nationally protected monuments. What is a coast minar? Coast minar is essentially a brick, have a major monument in that list. You can't have the coast minar or graves of colonial officials or the statue of a colonial official, or in some cases an antiquity. It's not even a monument, it's a cannon. Now, why should a cannon be a monument? And the reason I'm making a fuss about this is that the moment something is a nationally protected monument, for a 300-meter radius, you cannot do any development. So you see, supposing you have an old cannon in the middle of a city, for 300 meters now development can't be done. I would argue just move the cannon to a museum and protect it there properly. But then it'll free up the city for development and other activities.
Now, history in our country is always a very touchy and also deeply political subject. Given that, as it is, the current government stands accused very frequently of trying to rewrite history, saffronize it, etc. Do you hope that there will be a bipartisan consensus on this issue, or again, this is going to fall foul of those who say that history is being reimagined or rewritten to fit a certain mold?
So sadly, these things get politicized, but there's no reason to have any political debate about it. I mean, the list is there. A committee can be set up to go through the list. Those that are deemed to be genuinely being of the kind that are nationally important should be certainly protected. You can add new stuff to it as well. But clearly, graves of obscure colonial officials, I don't think any party in this country is very keen on protecting them. I don't think if there are missing monuments that nobody knows where they are, why can't they be removed from them? Similarly, I don't think anybody will argue against in the report.
The reason why I ask it is, to give a specific example, in April 2017, there was the landmark Hall of Nations. Now, that was at Pragati Maidan, and it was built by the Indira Gandhi government to celebrate 25 years of the country's independence. That was demolished to make space for new exhibition halls. At that time also, the same controversy rose, saying that, well, just because it was made by the Indira Gandhi government, suddenly you don't find it of historical importance. So is there a disconnect there of who finds what significant and, finds that it should be allowed to survive?
So let me say that my debate has nothing to do with these things. This is related to the monuments under something called AMASR Act. These only relate to buildings that are 100 years plus old. So if you are dealing with day-to-day redevelopment, which of course is a part of what we have to do. I mean, we're a living country and our cities are living cities. So continuously buildings will be demolished, new buildings built, and so on. And that debate could carry on. But the issue that has been raised in this EAC report relates to historical monuments 100 years or more old. And that is where the debate is. I don't think there needs to be anything can be political, but I'm quite sure for a very large part of that list, and if it is done transparently, there will be general consensus at the national level about what to do about it. I think more or less, if there is a set of clear criteria, we should be able to deal with it.
Actually, one really important thing, because of late, people have asked questions about the efficacy of the Archaeological Survey of India, whether they really have been.
NMA, that's the National Monuments Authority, was set up about a decade or more ago. And its job was to create plans for looking after these nationally protected monuments. So it's not about looking after the monument themselves, but about the land development around it. And that's what they were supposed to do. Now, as it's turned out that this artificial separation between the ASI that continues to look after the monument and developing plans around it by the NMA, well, it hasn't quite worked. I mean, some efforts have been made, some plans have indeed come together, so it's not that nothing has happened. But it is an artificial construct, because effectively you've got one body that preserves the monuments and a separate body, yet another body doing the development and management around it. So my view at least is that they should be unified back. Maybe the NMA should be given the full job of looking after the monument, and then it should be made a subordinate office within the ASI so that there is no friction between various departments. Otherwise you end up with too many autonomous bodies without control. So I would much rather streamline it down to fewer bodies, retain the NMA, but then have it clearly within the purview of the ASI. But with the specialized human capital and specialized powers.
And also more money, because your report also points out that we really have very woeful spending when it comes to the preservation of these monuments. How do you think that can be done? Maybe increase ticket prices? I mean, worldwide, I for one haven't seen anyone being charged 5 rupees for entry to a national monument, or 100 rupees maximum. People charge to the extent of, say, 20 euros, 50 euros. Is that one possibility? And what is
the lesser monuments get almost no money. I mean, it's 11 lakhs is the average, so there are monuments where 2-3 lakhs a year are spent. That's not even good enough to keep a chowkidar standing there. And so what's the point of having these monuments just there with no real preservation, no way of... So we need to spend a lot more. In order to do that, the first step is what we just discussed, is first of all that list has to be reduced to something that is meaningful. Be clear what we want to preserve. Then that meaningful list of nationally protected monuments need to be looked after well. That includes, by the way, things like entry fees. We tend to be very squeamish about charging people for going into these entry fees. Of course, the exact entry fee will depend on the particular monument and its location. We can't charge the same amount of money for a very major monument and a lesser one. But whatever it is, we need to charge something, and that money then needs to be retained in ASI. Right now what happens, it disappears into the Consolidated Fund of India. So there has to be, any organization has to have some sense of its intake and outtake. I mean, so the ASI needs to know that if it puts in the extra effort of garnering resources, those resources will be retained within ASI. That will give an incentive to the organization to become a little more, commercially oriented, if to put it, use a cruder term, but basically have some alignment between revenues and spending.
Finally, let me ask you, it was very curious that your report also mentions how you've got many monuments which have simply gone missing. How does that happen? How can a monument go missing? What are the factors involved there?
Good question. Nobody goes to visit them, and so on. Don't be surprised that they go missing. That is precisely the reason you want to rationalize this list. So, some years ago, maybe a little more than a decade ago, the CAG actually went and looked up about 1,200 monuments, and then it couldn't find several dozen of them. So a big hue and cry had happened at that time, and then the ASI did put in an effort and found some of those missing monuments later on. But the fact that it didn't know where they were right up front in itself tells you something. But even after that effort, there were still a few dozen monuments that could not be found. We don't know where they are. So this is where it is at. And by the way, there's an even more curious case, which is there in the report, of a statue of a colonial-era official, which was near Kashmiri Gate in the middle of Delhi. Now that statue was sent off to Northern Ireland in the 1960s. So the statue doesn't even exist there. But it is listed in our national monuments because it never got denotified. So you have a weird situation in the middle of Delhi. There is a site where the statue that's supposed to be protected doesn't exist. And but all the 300-meter rules apply there because it's, in theory, a national monument.
Well, at a time when we are trying to balance modernization and preservation of culture, it's very important that all of these loopholes also be highlighted and be addressed, hoping that there'll be bipartisan consensus on an issue as important and critical as this. Thank you very much, Mr. Sanyal, for speaking to Times Now.